Hey guys, tonight, get ready to tuck yourself in for a story even spicier than your group chat. The wildest royal orgies of the medieval times. Yes, you heard right. Forget fairy tales, dragons, or shiny suits of armor. Tonight we're tiptoeing past the velvet ropes of history's most scandalous after-parties, where the wine flowed faster than the hygiene, and a masquerade was less about masks and more about plausible deniability. This is the era when kings, queens, bishops, and enough bored nobility to fill a castle all got together and invented the concept of HR violations before HR existed. So before you slide into your pajamas, take a second to like this video and subscribe. But only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment below letting me know your bedtime beverage of choice. Is it chamomile tea, boxed wine, or that mysterious potion you found at the back of your fridge? Now, dim those lights, turn on a fan for maximum medieval ambience. It won't mask the historical smells, but it'll help, and make yourself comfortable. Maybe tuck your feet in, just in case you get a visit from the ghost of orgies past. But let's pause. Have you ever wondered what went down behind castle doors after the feasts ended? Was it all just lute music and polite applause? Or did things get wilder than a Renaissance fair on open mead night? Did royals actually swing from chandeliers, or is that just a modern insurance liability? What was the medieval version of a safe word, and who had to clean up afterward? Did the servants unionize? Or did they just write angry poems about it? Most importantly, would you survive a royal orgy? Or would you immediately get kicked out for bringing snacks from home? Congratulations, you've just woken up in 1394, the year the French court decided decadence was a personality trait, and the English nobility tried to keep up by inventing new sins. You're not just a fly on the castle wall tonight. You're about to be swept into the most forbidden, hilarious, and genuinely weird corners of medieval nightlife. Ready or not, you're in. It's dusk, and you receive an invitation sealed with the king's wax. Never a good sign. You're summoned to a private revel in the royal bedchamber. Translation: wear your fanciest tunic, bring plausible deniability, and maybe a mop. The medieval invitation comes with 3 rules. Trust no one, expect too much, and never ask what's in the soup. Let's set the scene. You're lounging by the hearth, half asleep, trying to ignore the castle's never-ending draft and that suspicious puddle in the corner. Suddenly, a royal page bursts in, out of breath, eyes wild, either because he ran the length of the hall or he's just come from the last private revel and is still processing what he saw. He hands you a parchment so heavily perfumed you can practically taste the lilies. The king's wax seal is pressed on with so much enthusiasm it's bent the whole scroll. It reads, with only a little subtlety, "Your presence is commanded at tonight's entertainment. Discretion, as always, is advised." Now, modern invitations are all digital, evites, calendar links, RSVP with a click, and a polite excuse about being busy. But in medieval times, ignoring an invite from the king wasn't just rude. It was dangerous. You can't ghost the monarchy. Miss one too many revels, and you don't just lose social standing, you might lose land, titles, or, in the worst-case scenario, your favorite head. So you sigh, put down your half-eaten turnip, and wonder for the 100th time why you ever befriended the local nobility. You begin your mental checklist. What do you wear to an event where private revel is code for the sort of gathering that will one day become a scandalous poem? You root through your meager wardrobe for something that says, "I'm here for a good time, but I'd also like plausible deniability at my future heresy trial." You settle on your least stained velvet tunic, the one with the questionable moth hole, and your only pair of shoes not previously owned by a goat. This is as close as medieval fashion gets to a little black dress. and the nerves set in, because everyone knows. At these parties, the invitation is only the beginning. There's the corridor walk, past lines of servants smirking into their sleeves, past the court musicians warming up with what sounds suspiciously like green sleeves, but with more giggling. The air smells of roasted meat, melted beeswax, and anxiety. You pass Lady Margaret in the hall, and she gives you the look, half sympathy, half see you on the other side. She's carrying a large fan and what might be an emergency ham. You finally arrive at the chamber door. A pair of guards, each with the expression of a man who's seen too much, check your name on a suspiciously short list. They nod, then swing open the door, and you're greeted by a wall of warmth, perfume, and the low hum of voices trying to sound more casual than they feel. The room is thick with anticipation. Candlelight flickering off jewels and gold teeth. The king sits on a slightly too ornate chair, already halfway through a goblet of wine, waving you in with the air of someone who expects this to be the highlight of his month or the beginning of his next problem. Inside, you spot the other invitees, some fidgeting, some posturing, a few already eyeing the exits. A bishop is making suspiciously friendly conversation with a knight, both pretending they don't recognize the local apothecary in the corner. A musician is nervously tuning his lute, praying it survives the evening. Someone is already asking about the wine. Everyone, you realize, is here for one reason, because they couldn't say no. You mingle, you nod. You try not to stare at the curtains that are definitely moving on their own. You remember the 3 rules: trust no one, especially not the host. Expect too much, and you still won't be prepared, and never, ever ask what's in the soup. Because in a medieval royal revel, the only thing you can really predict is that someone will regret saying yes to this invitation. And tonight, it might just be you. Tonight's dress code is whatever can be removed the fastest. You squeeze yourself into layers of velvet and brocade, stitched so tightly you're one sneeze away from accidental public nudity. The wealthy wore pearls, gold, and occasionally strategically placed fruit. The poor? They wore whatever wasn't already sticky from last time. Let's take a slow breath and imagine your wardrobe. The royal invitation says private revel, but everyone knows that means your outfit should walk a fine line between I'm here for courtly respectability and I'm prepared for things to escalate. Unlike modern parties, where you can check the group chat to see if anyone's wearing jeans, medieval fashion is an exercise in both opulence and optimism. You're not just dressing to impress, you're dressing to survive, and if you're lucky, to undress with dignity. The ritual begins with your undergarments. Linen, if you can afford it, or coarse wool, if you can't. In theory, the linen is for cleanliness. But let's be honest, at this point in history, you're basically layering grime for insulation. Over that, you add a chemise, a shift, and, if you're aiming to look continental, a pair of silk hose that will instantly betray you by sagging at the knees before the party even starts. Next comes the main event. The tunic or gown, embroidered so heavily you feel like a tapestry that's been mugged. This is where things get competitive. Nobles arrive wrapped in velvet imported from somewhere expensive and mysterious, brocades woven with gold threads, and sleeves so wide they have their own microclimate. For accessories, the sky's the limit. Pearls are strung everywhere, necklaces, belts, even randomly sewn into hats in a show of accidental wealth. A few ambitious souls pin entire apples or figs to their bodices, thanks to a French rumor about fruit and fertility that's already spiraled wildly out of control. If you're really committed, you've borrowed your cousin's jeweled girdle, which will slowly slide down your hips all night, threatening to take the rest of your outfit with it. For the gents, there are doublets so tight they qualify as medieval shapewear, hose that leave little to the imagination, and codpieces that are best left undescribed. It's a competition to see who can appear both the most important and the least prepared for physical activity. The real danger tonight? Buttons and laces. Every noble garment is a fortress of fastenings. There are so many ribbons, ties, and hooks that it would take a small army or a very motivated squire to get you undressed before sunrise. You tie them on tight, then immediately regret your optimism. And let's not forget the headwear. Ladies pin veils, hennins, and whatever floral arrangement was left over from last Sunday's feast to the top of their hair, all secured with exactly 3 prayers and a lot of hope. Gentlemen don hats so feathered and wide they could sweep the floor if the dancing gets rowdy. Shoes are pointed, buckled, and, more often than not, borrowed. Now, if you're lower down the social ladder, you make do. Your outfit might be recycled, meaning last week's stains are this week's patterns. Your one good cloak is airing out by the fire, and you're desperately hoping no one asks about the origin of that suspiciously sticky patch. Still, you do what you can. Pin on a wildflower, borrow a friend's hat, and pretend that the rip in your sleeve is a bold new style from Burgundy. As the hour approaches, you join the parade toward the royal bedchamber, shifting uncomfortably in your many layers, wishing for a fan and a fire exit. You're sweating before you even cross the threshold. And as you enter the candlelit room, you realize everyone else looks equally nervous, equally overdressed, and equally committed to pretending they're not thinking about how all this is going to come off later. Because tonight, fashion isn't just a statement, it's a dare, a challenge, and a logistical nightmare. You're here, you're dressed, mostly, and you're ready, sort of, for whatever comes next. Just remember, one sneeze, and you might become the main event. You step into a room where the tapestries are thick, the candelabras drip wax like nervous interns, and every surface is slightly sticky. Medieval orgies weren't held in barns for a reason. Castles had more beds, and crucially, more doors for a quick exit. Just try not to lean on the suits of armor. They remember things. Let's take a gentle look around. You're not in the family dining hall or the public throne room. This is the royal private chamber, which is a polite way of saying the room with the least supervision and the most expensive furniture. The air is a blend of sweet incense, melting beeswax, and the faint, ever-present tang of livestock. Somewhere, a window is open just enough to let in the sound of distant minstrels, but not enough to clear out the after-feast aroma. Tapestries cover every inch of wall, not for style, but to muffle what's about to become the world's loudest collection of questionable decisions. The scenes depicted? Mythical beasts, heroic battles, and at least 3 half-naked gods, all surprisingly on-brand for tonight's activities. Every fabric sways a little in the draft, as if it's just as anxious as you are. And yes, there's a suspicious amount of hay. The official reason? Hay is insulation against the castle chill. The real reason? Hay can be replaced when it gets compromised. There's always a servant with a pitchfork on standby, ready to refresh the area faster than you can say courtly misconduct. The candelabras work overtime, dripping fat blobs of wax onto tables, tapestries, and, occasionally, the unlucky hand of a passing noble. The light is golden, flickering, forgiving. Shadows bounce off the stone walls, helping disguise both faces and feelings. If you stand in just the right spot, you're lit up like a saint in an altarpiece. Stand in the wrong spot, and you're one wax spill away from joining the Hair on Fire Club, a surprisingly common event in medieval nightlife. Beds are everywhere. Not just one grand canopied bed, but clusters of pallets, piles of furs, and the odd divan dragged in from someone's retiring room. Feather beds if you're lucky, straw if you're not. Some optimistic person has even provided a small mountain of velvet cushions though these will inevitably end up on the floor, possibly out the window or in the moat by sunrise. In the corner, there's a screen, ostensibly for privacy, actually for eavesdropping. No matter how big the castle, there's never enough room for everyone to be discreet at the same time. And then there's the sticky problem. Everything is just a little bit tacky. The tables, polished with mead and hope, have hosted one too many spilled flagons. The flagstones are suspiciously glossy in patches. The chairs? Let's just say you don't want to run your hand along the underside. There are rumors about what happened at last month's revel, but the only people who really know are the ones still picking splinters out of their thighs. The windows are high and narrow. Good for keeping out bandits, bad for letting out awkward noises. A few are propped open with decorative swords or abandoned boots, in a vain attempt at ventilation. The air, nevertheless, remains thick and heavy, sweet with perfume, smoky with candle wax, and tinged with anticipation. At some point, someone will try to waft the air with a fan, only to spread the aromas around like medieval potpourri. Suites of armor line the walls, silent witnesses to centuries of questionable royal choices. Each suit is polished but battered, and you swear one just winked at you. It's best not to touch them, legend has it. One knight's ghost is still embarrassed from what he saw at a similar gathering in 1312. And always there are the doors, heavy, oaken, slightly creaky, and never locked from the inside, for obvious reasons. Every participant makes a mental note of where the exits are, just in case they need to slip out for a breath of fresh air, a secret rendezvous, or a sudden urgent confession. So you settle into the room, letting the warmth, the candlelight, and the low thrum of anticipation wrap around you. It's grand and grimy, opulent and absurd. A medieval castle at night, the safest place in the world for secrets, or the fastest place for them to get out. Tonight's roster includes 3 minor lords, a duchess with a reputation, 2 bishops in disguise, and at least 1 foreign envoy pretending not to be shocked. Remember, social climbing in the Middle Ages often meant sharing a bed with your rival's cousin and hoping nobody drew a tapestry of it. Let's meet your fellow attendees. If you're hoping for elegant restraint and dignified small talk, you're about to be disappointed. The medieval nobility had all the subtlety of a marching band in a library, and twice as much drama. Each guest arrives with a carefully rehearsed look of nonchalance, but the glances they throw around the room could curdle cream. Every accidental brush of the hand is a coded message, and every side-eye is a potential threat, an invitation, or both. First up, the minor lords. These are men who have just enough land to matter, but not enough to avoid parties like this. They arrive in silk doublets that scream debt, clutching goblets as if their next mortgage payment depends on it. They're here to curry favor, find a wealthier marriage, or, at the very least, make sure nobody forgets their family name by sunrise. Their idea of flirting, loud jokes about hunting, and a suspicious number of offers to refill your cup. Next, the Duchess with a reputation, a woman whose previous parties are still whispered about by terrified squires. Her entrance is a performance, velvet, pearls, and a perfume so bold it could be declared a weapon. She glides through the crowd, gathering admirers and rivals like a snowball rolling downhill. She has the rare power of making everyone, even the bishops, just a little nervous. Her laugh is legendary, her glare is fatal, and she always knows where the king is. Then there are the bishops in disguise. They show up in fine velvet, but you can spot the tonsure peeking out from under their hats. They're officially present as advisors, but you'll see them lurking near the wine, muttering prayers of forgiveness in between the giggles. One bishop is notorious for breaking his fast at every party, another for quoting scripture while failing to make eye contact with anyone wearing fewer than 3 layers. Church doctrine is clear. These events are a sin. The bishop's doctrine is even clearer. At least try to sin with plausible deniability. Hovering at the edge is the foreign envoy, a visitor from a rival court or a distant duchy. His expression never changes, somewhere between bemused and traumatized. He's here to observe, report, and ideally survive without accidentally marrying anyone. Every time a new guest enters, the envoy makes a note, a bow, and a silent prayer that his king never hears about this in detail. He's the only one drinking water, the only one who brought his own napkin, and the only one who will wake up tomorrow with both his dignity and his secrets intact. Probably. Scattered among the big names are the usual suspects: ambitious knights hoping for a promotion, bored courtiers eager for gossip, and a handful of wealthy merchants trying to blend in and failing. There's also always a poet, clutching parchment, quietly taking notes for tomorrow's scandalous song. No medieval gathering is complete without someone to immortalize the event in rhyming couplets and badly drawn marginalia. Don't forget the servants, who know everything and say nothing, at least to your face. They're the true witnesses, quietly keeping score, passing notes, and distributing gossip with a speed that would shame Twitter. Somewhere in the crowd, a squire is trying to impress a lady in waiting by describing his land holdings, which mostly consist of a muddy ditch and an aggressive goose. Tonight, alliances are made and broken by candlelight. A single misplaced wink can lead to a decade-long feud. Behind every polite greeting is a silent calculation: who's rising, who's falling, who's desperately trying not to be recognized by last week's angry husband. You mingle, you eavesdrop, you try to look like you belong, even as you wonder how many people here are truly here for pleasure, and how many just don't want to miss out on the next big scandal. Because in the Middle Ages, being on the guest list is less about friendship and more about survival. You're not just mingling, you're auditioning for your next promotion, your next marriage, or, if you play your cards wrong, your next embarrassing family legend. Enjoy the company. Just try not to get immortalized in tapestry. The table groans under the weight of honeyed figs, oysters, allegedly an aphrodisiac, actually just a choking hazard, and gallons of spiced wine. You drink deeply, both because it's tradition and because you need to forget you just made eye contact with the archbishop. Let's walk through this edible minefield. Medieval feasts were equal parts spectacle, status symbol, and gastrointestinal roulette. The royal kitchen staff has been up since dawn, sweating over wood fires and muttering prayers that nobody notices the rat footprints in the flour. You're handed a goblet of wine as soon as you arrive, mostly as a preventative measure. The wine is warm, fragrant, spiced with cloves and cinnamon, imported, expensive, and strong enough to make you forget the main course probably contains 3 things you can't pronounce and at least one you'd never order on purpose. On the buffet, towers of sweetmeats, platters of roast meats, and bowls of exotic fruits. The figs are local, sticky, and buzzing with flies. The oysters, brought in at great expense from the coast, are displayed as a flex, but everyone's quietly aware that medieval refrigeration is just a wish and a prayer. A few daring souls slurp them down with bravado, winking at each other and trying to ignore the odd crunch of unexpected sand. Meanwhile, there's always one unlucky knight whose entire romantic evening is derailed by an oyster shell shard to the gums. You reach for something safer. Cheese. It's tangy, salty, and, like everything else here, just on the edge of expiration. There are hard loaves of bread, dense enough to injure someone if you're not careful, and endless trays of candied nuts, which stick to your teeth and your dignity in equal measure. The centerpiece is usually a roast animal, a boar's head, mouth stuffed with apples, eyes staring into your soul, or a peacock, feathers still attached and dyed an unnatural blue. For a second, You wonder if it's looking at you, silently judging your table manners. Of course, at a party like this, the menu is full of aphrodisiacs. Almond tarts, considered a love charm. Honey cakes, rumored to guarantee a good night. Results may vary. A pomegranate, cracked open on the table, seeds glistening like little red promises. You watch as the Duchess discreetly slips a slice of quince to her companion, who pretends not to notice the three bishops pretending not to notice. The ale flows as freely as the gossip. You're handed a second goblet before you finish your first. And nobody's keeping track, except the servants, who have a secret sweepstakes on who will fall asleep at the table first. The ale is weak, the mead is sweet, and the wine is strong enough to take the edge off a bad joke or an accidental footsie with the wrong person. Toasts are frequent and increasingly slurred. Someone tries to start a drinking game, but it collapses immediately under the weight of medieval rules, which mostly consist of drink until the room makes sense. But beneath the laughter, there's a current of suspicion. Poison is always a possibility. Every course is sampled by a nervous food taster who looks increasingly ill with each bite. The bishops cross themselves before drinking. You're not paranoid, just practical. After all, one wrong sip and you could be the subject of tomorrow's bardic lament, sung badly and off-key in every tavern from here to Burgundy. And yet, the fear doesn't stop anyone. It's tradition. You eat because you're hungry, you drink because you're nervous, and you keep a careful eye on the plum pudding. Rumor has it, last year's batch was responsible for both a brief romance and a 2-week quarantine. By dessert, nobody cares what they're eating. It's all a blur of honey, pastry, and someone's elbow in your bread trencher. You raise your cup in a final toast, forgetting your worries, your rivals, and, for a brief moment, even the Archbishop. After all, in medieval high society, surviving the meal is half the fun. The rest? That starts when the table is finally cleared. The air is thick with music. The court minstrels have swapped their usual ballads for tunes with double meanings and questionable lyrics. Nothing says let's get wild like a recorder solo and a background choir of increasingly drunk nobles. Let's settle into the soundscape for a moment. If you're imagining delicate harp music floating through perfumed air, think again. Medieval party music is less spa playlist and more awkward karaoke after 3 meads. The minstrels, usually relegated to playing gentle background music for the royal dinner, have finally gotten their chance to shine. And by shine, we mean push the boundaries of what you can get away with in front of 2 bishops and a duchess with a reputation. The main attraction is the lute player, a man with nimble fingers, questionable morals, and a deep knowledge of every risque verse ever banned by the local abbot. He strums out a melody that starts sweet, then devolves into something suspiciously familiar to anyone who's ever attended a bachelorette party. He winks at Lady Margaret, who pretends to be scandalized but requests another round anyway. In the corner, a pair of flutists, one sober, one dangerously close to passing out, embellish every tune with trills and flourishes. At some point, one of them launches into a solo so shrill that a falcon asleep in the rafters startles and nearly takes out the chandelier. Everyone laughs, except for the falcon, who looks ready to file a complaint. But the real magic is in the lyrics. Songs at a medieval revel are a carefully balanced blend of old favorites and new compositions, each one more suggestive than the last. There are love ballads with flowers that definitely aren't flowers, and drinking songs with rhymes so bawdy that the servants in the hallway blush and drop their trays. Every chorus is an invitation to join in, and by the second verse, even the foreign envoy is humming along, too polite to refuse. As the night goes on, the tunes get wilder. Someone unearths a drum, thumping out a beat that rattles the wine goblets and sends a wave of energy through the room. Nobles who haven't danced since the last coronation suddenly remember the steps badly, and everyone forms a circle, arms linked, spinning faster and faster until the room itself seems to sway. It's not just the wine, it's the music, pulling everyone into its orbit. Occasionally, the minstrels try their hand at improvisation. A wandering troubadour leaps onto a table, launches into a parody of a famous hymn, and somehow manages to rhyme abbot with rabbit. The laughter is loud and a little bit dangerous. You notice the bishops exchanging nervous glances, then taking another long sip of wine. Nobody is quite sure if they're amused or making mental notes for future excommunications. There's even a moment of audience participation. A brave squire is pressured into singing a local folk song. He forgets the words halfway through, so he makes up new ones about the Duchess's hat and the lord who fell in the moat last year. The result is a mix of genuine hilarity and impending lawsuit. By now, everyone's sense of decorum has dissolved like sugar in hot mead. All around you, the room pulses with energy, clapping, stomping, out-of-tune harmonies, and the unmistakable sound of someone attempting to play a shawm after 6 cups of ale. The minstrels grin, knowing that tonight they are as important as any noble in the room. For a few hours, music makes everyone equal. The lords, the ladies, the servants, even the slightly traumatized falcon. By the time the last notes drift away and the crowd slumps back onto velvet cushions, the mood has shifted. The tension has melted into laughter, the awkwardness transformed into camaraderie. And somewhere in the shadows, another round of lewd lyrics is already being composed for the next wild night. In medieval times, music was the key that unlocked the party, and tonight, the minstrels are the ones holding it. Medieval orgies are less anything goes and more anything goes if you don't get caught. The rules are unwritten but strictly enforced. No biting the king, no using the royal scepter for non-royal purposes. And if you hear someone shout, "Pope," hide under a table. Let's pause and appreciate that even in the wildest of parties, there's still a medieval Martha Stewart somewhere, quietly enforcing etiquette between mouthfuls of marzipan. In modern life, party rules are mostly about not double-dipping or texting your ex after midnight. But in the castle, the stakes are much higher. Here, one false move could cost you your reputation, your fortune, or, depending on the day, a surprisingly valuable hat. Upon arrival, you're greeted by a master of ceremonies, usually a minor noble whose job is to look the other way until he absolutely can't. He'll whisper a few reminders as you enter. Don't spill wine on the tapestries. Don't let the dogs eat the pearls again. And please, whatever you do, don't try to joust indoors. You nod solemnly, trying to look like you understand, even as you quietly review the escape routes you memorized earlier. Inside, everyone pretends not to know the rules. That's half the fun. But watch closely, and you'll see a code of conduct as intricate as any tapestry. The first rule is simple: respect the hierarchy. The king gets first choice of seat, of song, of everything. His whims are law, at least until he falls asleep or gets distracted by a particularly attractive plate of oysters. After the king, the order is determined by title, scandal history, and the speed with which you can invent a plausible alibi. There are rules about food and drink. Mostly, don't touch someone else's goblet unless you're ready to share everything, including the possible side effects. There are rules about dancing. Hands above the waist, unless you're invited lower by someone with more jewelry than scruples. If you drop your mask, retrieve it quickly. If someone else drops theirs, pretend you didn't see. Discretion is both the first and last commandment of medieval revelry. Then there's the rule of what happens here, stays here, or else. Servants are sworn to silence, under pain of losing not just their tips but their position. Gossip, of course, is inevitable, but outright tattling is punishable by exile, penance, or, worst of all, being assigned to the latrines for a month. If you must share secrets, do it by candlelight, with at least 2 doors closed and a friendly bard nearby to drown out your whispers. Some rules are more practical. Don't wear spurs on the furniture. Don't duel before dessert. Don't swap seats unless you want to spend the next week explaining yourself to the steward, your spouse, and 3 increasingly irate friars. If you're the source of a wardrobe malfunction, you're responsible for both the repair and the apology gift, usually something edible or, in extreme cases, a new goat. Enforcement is a community effort. If someone gets too rowdy, a group of squires will appear as if summoned by magic, gently but firmly escorting the offender out to cool off in the stables. The Duchess with a reputation may smile and wave, but she's also memorized every rule and is keeping score for next week's gossip session. And if anyone gets ideas about running off with the royal cutlery, just know that there's an entire subclause in the Code of Conduct about spoons. But sometimes, even the best-laid rules fail. That's where tradition comes in. Every guest is expected to participate in a group toast to forgiveness at the end of the night. A subtle acknowledgement that mistakes were made, dignity was lost, and everyone will pretend not to notice in the morning. It's less of a legal agreement and more of a mutual pact of plausible deniability. So as you mingle under the candlelight, navigating the labyrinth of unwritten laws and whispered warnings, remember, courtly chaos is just order in disguise. The real rule? Enjoy yourself, but not so much that you become next month's cautionary tale. You're handed a mask, allegedly for mystery, but really just to maintain plausible deniability. After midnight, everyone forgets who's who, except for the one guy who keeps yelling his own name. Let's slow down and soak in the atmosphere. The masquerade is a ritual as old as courtly scandal, a pageant of secrecy, and, let's be honest, an excuse to make regrettable choices with fewer consequences. In a world without security cameras or social media, the mask is the original privacy setting, one that lets you blame your mistakes on a mysterious stranger who, for legal reasons, definitely wasn't you. Your mask is lavish if you're rich, gilded, feathered, maybe with a jeweled tear at the corner to show you have feelings, or at least enough money to rent some. If you're less wealthy, you get something fashioned out of stiffened linen, with ribbons that itch and a painted moustache that looks suspiciously like the family goat. Some guests go all out, arriving as mythical beasts or classical gods. Others stick with a simple domino mask, the medieval equivalent of "I tried." Wearing a mask in a castle chamber filled with flickering candlelight and perfume is both freeing and oddly disorienting. You immediately lose all depth perception. Your breath fogs up the inside, and within 5 minutes, you've got sweat trickling down your cheek and a sudden, irrational fear of being recognized by your nose alone. But you persevere, because the alternative is facing this crowd fully barefaced, and not even the boldest duchess dares that. As the night deepens, so does the confusion. Someone dressed as a fox flirts with what might be a bishop disguised as Bacchus, and a knight in a painted lion mask asks you 3 times if you're the one from the hunting party. Nobody corrects him. Somewhere in the corner, 2 people in identical owl masks share an intense conversation about medieval grain tariffs, each convinced the other is someone completely different. Even the servants get in on it, donning leftover masks and occasionally switching trays just to keep things interesting. The main advantage of the masquerade isn't mystery, it's plausible deniability. Tomorrow morning, when accusations start to fly and the gossip mills turn, you can simply shrug and say, Wasn't me. I was the peacock. Even if you're not sure who you were, the point is that no one else is sure either. Historians would later call this social fluidity. You call it not getting blamed for breaking the king's new stool. There are, of course, rules. Remove your mask only in private, or at least when you're certain the only witnesses are people with more to lose than you. Never trade masks with someone halfway through the night unless you're ready to accept responsibility for whatever they've done up to that point. This is how you end up with a mysterious goose feather in your belt and a letter of challenge from a squire in the morning. And above all, don't shout your own name, no matter how triumphant you feel. There's always one person who forgets this and spends the next month being called Sir Geoffrey the Obvious. Every so often, someone tries to unmask the crowd with a sudden dramatic gesture, usually a tipsy lord who thinks he's the main character. The effect is always the same: a brief pause, nervous laughter, and a new rule added to the unofficial code of conduct. No spontaneous mask removal. See Lady Alice's incident, 1387. But at its heart, the masquerade is liberating. With your mask on, you can dance with abandon, flirt with confidence, and eat 2 pieces of honey tart without anyone judging your appetite. You can be bolder, quieter, kinder, or more outrageous than you ever are by daylight. For a few fleeting hours, status dissolves, grudges pause, and everyone is united by the sheer absurdity of hiding in plain sight. As dawn threatens and the masks are finally peeled away, revealing smudged faces, wild hair, and the occasional look of sheer horror, there's an unspoken agreement. What happened behind the mask stays behind the mask. After all, in medieval high society, plausible deniability is more valuable than gold. Candles flicker everywhere, making everyone look 10% hotter and 100% more flammable. Someone always knocks over a candelabra. The real scandal. How many orgies ended in accidental small house fires? Let's step into the glow. The scene is set with hundreds, sometimes thousands of candles, perched in candelabras, sconces, and anything that might plausibly hold a flame. Beeswax if you're rich, tallow if you're not. Both equally determined to drip molten wax on your best shoes. The shadows jump and play across the walls, blurring the edges of faces and lending everyone a kind of mysterious allure that daylight could never hope to provide. By candlelight, even the Duke's wart looks poetic. Of course, with so much flickering light and even more flickering self-restraint, disaster is always one elbow away. Candles are toppled with the regularity of the church bell. A stray sleeve, a misguided arm gesture, or just the slow creep of gravity working its magic on a candelabra with one leg shorter than the rest. If you're lucky, the only thing to suffer is a lace cuff or a bit of dignity. If you're not, well, that's how the East Wing got its new open-air concept last winter. The air is thick with the scents of hot wax and scorched wool, occasionally punctuated by the sudden, unmistakable whiff of burning hair. It's a reminder that medieval parties were never just about food and fun. They were about survival. There's a certain thrill in dancing dangerously close to a live flame. Your silk sleeve inches away from transforming you into the main event. It adds a new level of excitement and possibly insurance risk to every group hug. No one is ever really sure who's in charge of fire safety. The king claims it's the steward's job. The steward swears it's the footman's. The footmen know the truth. Once the first goblet of wine is spilled, everyone is on their own. Somewhere, a servant hovers with a damp cloth, eyeing every spark like a hawk. And then there's the unlucky fireboy, the lowest-ranking member of staff, whose job is to stamp out small blazes and, occasionally, large ones, preferably before the Queen's favourite tapestry is reduced to medieval confetti. But the real role of candlelight isn't just illumination. its transformation. Shadows turn awkward realities into romantic possibilities. The soft, uneven light hides stains, wrinkles, and at least 3 regrettable fashion choices. Everyone looks a little more mysterious, a little less sleep-deprived. The right flicker can turn a nervous squire into a shadowy heartthrob and a middle-aged noblewoman into the stuff of troubadour songs, at least until morning, when everyone realizes it was mostly just candlelight and optimism. It's not all glamour, though. The heat from a few dozen flames quickly raises the temperature to soup in a tunic. Wax splatters everywhere, sometimes landing in goblets or, more alarmingly, in the roasted peacock. There are ongoing debates about whether candle drippings are a sign of prosperity or just proof that nobody bothered to clean up after last week's event. Either way, everyone learns to check their chair before sitting down, unless they enjoy a surprise waxing. Then there's the spectacle of the grand blackout, an almost nightly event where too many candles are snuffed at once, plunging the room into chaos. Instantly, someone shrieks, someone else giggles, and for a brief, glorious moment, all social hierarchy vanishes as everyone fumbles for a source of light, a lost shoe, or the exit. The panic passes quickly, replaced by laughter and the slow, cautious process of relighting everything and pretending nothing happened. So you mingle, bask in the glow, and try to keep your hair out of the flames. In a world without electricity, candlelight is both a blessing and a recurring hazard, a source of beauty, danger, and endless stories about the time Lady Agnes set the buffer table ablaze with nothing but enthusiasm and a trailing sleeve. When you finally collapse onto a fur-piled bench, cheeks flushed and eyes dazzled, you'll swear it's all a dream until you discover the glob of wax in your shoe and the singe mark on your only nice cloak. In medieval nightlife, the only thing hotter than the gossip is the lighting. At some point, there's an official unrobing. It's less elegant than you'd think. Mostly a lot of grunting, knots, and the occasional elbow to the face. By now, the wine has erased all memory of personal space or boundaries. Let's not kid ourselves. This is the moment the minstrels stop pretending to tune their lutes and the servants adopt the 1,000-yard stare of people who know that whatever happens next, it's not in the manual. Unrobing in medieval high society is part ceremony, part athletic event, and part accidental slapstick comedy. If you were hoping for the graceful disrobing you've seen in Renaissance paintings, adjust your expectations. Imagine a room full of slightly tipsy, overdressed nobles, all tangled in layers of velvet, ribbons, and optimism. It starts with a signal, usually a raised goblet or an off-key note from the band. Sometimes just the king standing up and announcing, "I am too warm." That's your cue. You glance around, a dozen hopeful faces, flushed from wine and anticipation, all sizing each other up like contestants on a particularly underfunded reality show. There's a mad scramble as belts are unbuckled, clasps undone, and sleeves yanked. Someone is always stuck in a particularly complicated gown, arms flailing like a drowning goose until a friend or opportunistic rival comes to the rescue. Here's the dirty secret of medieval fashion. Nothing is designed to come off quickly. Buttons are the size of peas and multiply mysteriously in the night. Laces snake up backs, sleeves, and, if you're really unlucky, across both. There are knots tied by over-enthusiastic servants who apparently believed in triple security. For a few awkward minutes, the party sounds less like a boudoir and more like a tug-of-war tournament. Someone loses a shoe, someone else loses a hairpiece, and at least one person loses their dignity as a prized sleeve goes flying into the fire. If you're a seasoned guest, you planned ahead. Easy release ties, a discreetly loose doublet, maybe even a breakaway tunic. If you're new, you're the one hopping on one foot, trying desperately to look seductive, while removing a wool stocking that simply refuses to budge. All around, laughter bubbles up, half nervous, half giddy, A few well-timed jokes from the minstrels, what you call a naked lord, out of favor, keep things light and everyone distracted from the fact that three people are now tangled in a communal cloak. And then, finally, there's that first collective sigh as the last stubborn ribbon gives way. Cloaks drop, sleeves flutter, and the air is suddenly alive with the sound of bare feet on stone, the rustle of linen, and the faint pop of a jewel landing somewhere inconvenient. The tension that's been simmering under all that velvet and bravado breaks, replaced by a giddy mix of relief, hilarity, and just a bit of panic. The true magic of this moment is how quickly it becomes normal. Where a half hour ago, the idea of anyone seeing you without your doublet was mortifying, now you're swapping jokes with the same people who saw you nearly trip over your own trousers. Hierarchies blur. The king is just another guy trying to fold his tunic neatly before it ends up in the soup. The duchess with a reputation helps the bishop with an impossible sash. Even the foreign envoy, who claimed to be just observing, is now barefoot and grinning sheepishly, one sock at a time. It's all very democratic, in a chaotic sort of way. For a little while, nobody cares who's who or what's what. All the awkwardness and anxiety about making an impression melt away. The room is full of bodies and laughter and the sense that, at least tonight, everyone is in on the same joke. So you let yourself relax. Maybe laugh at your own failed attempt to look mysterious, or help untangle a new friend from their third petticoat. By the time the last cloak hits the floor, the boundaries have vanished, and the real party, such as it is, has finally begun. You think modern parties are awkward? Try medieval party games, like Blind Man's Buff played with real blindfolds and suspiciously high stakes. The winner? Whoever can keep a straight face during interpretive jousting. Let's set the scene. The candles are guttering, the wine is flowing, and the awkwardness that comes from seeing your neighbor in nothing but stockings is just starting to subside. In this lull, somewhere between dessert and disaster, the king, always eager to keep things interesting, claps his hands and calls for entertainments. That's your cue. You're about to discover that nothing tests your dignity or flexibility quite like medieval party games. First up, Blind Man's Buff. This is a classic. One noble is blindfolded with a length of silk, or, if you're unlucky, the bishop's spare robe, and spun in place until they lose all sense of space and time. The rest of the party scampers around, shrieking and giggling, dodging the blindfolded seeker's outstretched hands. If you're caught, you must submit to whatever forfeit the group invents, recite a naughty poem, perform an embarrassing dance, or admit which dish at dinner you secretly fed to the dog. The stakes are higher than you'd think. Reputations have been made and unmade in the 3 minutes it takes for Lady Agnes to trip over her own chemise. Interpretive jousting, meanwhile, is what happens when someone finds 2 wooden spoons, a pillow, and too much courage. You mount your steed, usually a borrowed footstool or a slightly panicked squire, and attempt to unseat your opponent using only props and sheer bravado. Points are awarded for style, enthusiasm, and not breaking the furniture. The real challenge? Maintaining any shred of dignity as you bounce across the floor with a feather duster for a lance and the Duchess for an audience. Then there's hot tapestry. This one is simple. A length of embroidered fabric is passed around while the musicians play a lively tune. When the music stops, whoever holds the tapestry must confess a secret, real or invented, or face a dare of the group's choosing. Dares range from serenading the bishop, who pretends not to enjoy it, to swapping masks with the person you least suspect. All in front of an audience, hungry for scandal. By the end, the tapestry is covered in wine stains, and the confessions are 80% exaggeration, but that's half the fun. Don't forget courtly charades. Here, Guests mime famous scenes from history, legend, or last week's gossip, while everyone else guesses. Of course, after enough wine, even the best attempts at miming the Siege of Rouen end up looking like someone wrestling an invisible pig. There are bonus points for creativity and for keeping a straight face while the foreign envoy tries to act out the Great Cheese Incident of 1372. And if you're truly unlucky, someone will insist on truth or consequences. A game where questions are posed, alliances tested, and secrets spilled at a rate that would terrify a modern HR department. The questions are personal, the dares are preposterous, and every answer is carefully filed away for future use by the court's professional gossips. Throughout, the laughter is loud, the humiliation mostly good-natured, and the physical risks real. Feet are stepped on, egos are bruised, and at least one candlestick is knocked over every round. The room rings with the kind of joy that only comes from watching your social superiors hop around in their underthings, desperately trying to look graceful. If you're lucky, your own performance will be forgotten by sunrise. If not, congratulations. You're now the lead character in next week's most popular ballad. In the end, these party games are a social minefield, a test of nerves, and the great equalizer of the medieval world. Lords, ladies, bishops, and servants, all a fair game when the rules dissolve, and the only true winner is the one who can laugh at themselves the hardest. So take a deep breath, tie on your blindfold, and hope for the best. In the medieval court, every game is high stakes, and every mistake is historic. Nothing attracts a spy like a naked duke. Behind every curtain is a servant, scribe, or jealous spouse, all ready to gossip for the right price. Keeping secrets was a full-time medieval job with absolutely no retirement plan. Let's set the mood. You might think that a royal orgy is all about pleasure and letting your guard down, but for half the people in attendance, it's actually a goldmine for intelligence gathering. Forget secret letters and hidden passages. Tonight, the juiciest information is hiding behind a velvet drape, peeking out from under a table, or being scribbled onto parchment by a scribe who just wanted to record the guest list. In the Middle Ages, information is power, and power is always in short supply. Everywhere you look, someone is watching. That footman? He's memorized every embarrassing detail and will be reporting back to the steward before dawn. The lady in waiting? She's listening with both ears and already calculating how much her knowledge is worth to the Duchess's rivals. Even the minstrels are in on it. The songs they play tomorrow will be filled with not-so-subtle references to last night's escapades. And their lyrics have a way of circulating throughout the realm much faster than anyone's official proclamations. And don't forget the professional spies, agents employed by neighboring kingdoms, ex-lovers with an agenda, and the occasional foreign envoy who just happened to get an invitation. Some even show up disguised as servants, sweeping floors by midnight and eavesdropping by 1. It's the original gig economy, except the pay is in secrets, and the risk is public humiliation or worse. Jealous spouses, meanwhile, work the room with the intensity of private investigators who skipped the orientation. They've got eyes everywhere, recruiting allies and bribing maids for information. A single misplaced shoe, a scent of unfamiliar perfume, or a love note folded the wrong way can set off weeks of accusations and denials. Some even go undercover themselves, donning masks and pretending to flirt just to see who else is breaking the rules. In medieval society, trust is fragile and drama is the main export. And if you think you're safe just because you're careful, think again. There are spies for the church, eager to catch clergy in compromising positions. There are spies for the local magistrate, hoping to catch nobles in illegal shenanigans. Even the king has his informants, each tasked with ensuring loyalty, or at least plausible deniability. Sometimes you're not even sure if you're here to have fun or to keep an eye on someone else. The answer is always both, and everyone's a little bit nervous about it. Secrets in the Middle Ages are never safe for long. There's no encryption, no delete for everyone button, and no plausible deniability once the court poet starts reciting your nickname in verse. Information spreads the old-fashioned way. Whispered in corridors, sung in songs, painted in marginalia by bored monks with too much time and a sense of humor. The next day, half the castle staff will know what happened, and by the end of the week, so will the neighboring lords, the baker's cousin, and a Flemish wool merchant who's never even met you. The true professionals, though, know how to keep a secret, at least until the price is right. The best spies have a talent for sitting quietly, blending in, and remembering everything. They'll never tell you what they know, but they'll make sure you realize they know it. It's a game of leverage, blackmail, and subtle threats, and everyone plays, whether they want to or not. So you keep your guard up, even as you're trying to relax. Maybe you whisper a little less, or check behind the tapestry before you say something clever. Maybe you smile at the scribe and hope he's writing your name correctly, or not at all. In a medieval orgy, secrets are the hottest currency, and the real entertainment is figuring out who's watching whom and why. By dawn, half the guests will be exhausted not just from the revels, but from the effort of keeping stories straight, alibis firm, and reputations, if not spotless, at least creatively defended. Because here, every scandal is an opportunity, and every eye in the room is just waiting for someone to slip. There's always one guest who feels guilty halfway through and starts loudly praying for forgiveness. Medieval clergy had a love-hate relationship with orgies, officially condemning them, unofficially sending wine. Let's take a moment to appreciate the paradox. Medieval Europe was a world ruled by rituals and reminders of original sin, and yet, behind every velvet curtain, there's a bishop half hidden in shadows, holding a goblet and humming along with the minstrels. If there's one thing that could make a royal orgy even more complicated, it's inviting the church, an institution that loves rules almost as much as it loves a really good loophole. On paper, the clergy are against everything happening tonight. They preach sermons about purity and restraint, warn against the dangers of the flesh, and threaten anyone who gets too friendly at the feast with an afterlife full of boiling pitch and regret. But that's the official line. In practice, things get a little blurrier once the sun sets and the wine starts flowing. No one gossips like a priest with a secret, and no one drinks quite as enthusiastically as a monk who's just sampling the vintage for tithes. You'll spot them at the edge of the crowd, dressed in black or purple, faces carefully arranged into expressions of mild disapproval. The bishop spends half the night making the sign of the cross, and the other half making the rounds with a goblet. The abbot is more pragmatic. He keeps an eye on the serving staff to make sure the best wine goes to the right people and the scandalous rumors don't leave the room. Some of the younger friars sneak in by accident, looking for spiritual guidance and finding something altogether different. At least one guest always has a crisis of conscience. Maybe it's the squire who's just realized that flirting with the duchess is probably a sin. Maybe it's the knight who, mid-revel, remembers tomorrow is Sunday and starts mumbling prayers under his breath. There's usually a quiet corner for impromptu confessions, often hosted by the least judgmental priest present, usually the one already on his second helping of honeyed figs. The relationship between church and court is complicated, a centuries-old dance of condemnation and indulgence. The clergy are expected to keep the court in line, but they're also expected to turn a blind eye when it's politically useful. Every now and then, the king will invite a particularly fire and brimstone preacher to the festivities, just to remind everyone of the rules. Inevitably, that same preacher is later found in the kitchens, ministering to a nervous cook with a bottle of the good stuff. Of course, the church also profits from these events. The next morning, there's a sudden uptick in donations for masses for the soul, and the confessional booth is packed. Guilt is good business, and everyone knows that an indulgence, or 5, can smooth things over with God. Priests offer spiritual absolution with one hand and a wine refill with the other. The church gets a cut of the action, sometimes in coin, sometimes in gossip, always in leverage. In the grand tradition of do as I say, not as I do, the clergy play their part to perfection. They warn of damnation, hint at forgiveness, and quietly reserve judgment, at least until they're safely back at the monastery, drafting their next sermon about the dangers of loose morals. And while they might not dance the wildest or sing the loudest, they're often the last to leave, making sure everyone's secrets are well kept and well remembered. By sunrise, most of the guests have confessed at least once, some to God, some to each other, some to the empty wine jugs lining the floor. The church, ever pragmatic, gathers the last donations, tidies up the last scandal, and prepares to remind everyone at Sunday Mass that heaven is for the penitent, not the perfect. So as you slip away from the festivities, say a quick prayer for forgiveness, or at least for a little discretion. In medieval times, everyone was a sinner, and the church made sure to keep the doors open, the wine flowing, and the absolutions just out of reach. The sun rises on a room that smells of spilt ale, expensive perfume, and shame. You wake up next to someone who introduces themselves as Sir Geoffrey, probably, and you both vow never to speak of this night again. Let's linger in this delicate morning misery. Medieval castles are beautiful by torchlight, but by dawn, the illusion fades. The rich brocade cushions look a little less regal and a little more sticky. The once festive tapestries now seem to judge you. Every candle stub on the floor is a reminder of last night's chaos, and you're desperately hoping the wax in your hair is just wax. Somewhere, a forgotten minstrel is snoring gently on a pile of cloaks, hugging a lute for emotional support. Your head is pounding with the ferocity of a peasant's mallet, and your mouth tastes like last night's spiced wine, stale honey, and defeat. You grope around for your shoes, but they've vanished, probably swapped for someone else's in the great midnight cloakroom lottery. There's a cold breeze coming through the window, the only sign that medieval airing out the castle is happening. On the far side of the room, a knight in nothing but a tablecloth tries to negotiate with a surly servant for the return of his dignity and his pants. You sit up, slowly. The stone floor is unforgiving, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and reminds you that medieval heating is a myth. The nearest pillow is suspiciously damp. The fire has died down to embers, and someone's used your cloak as a makeshift curtain to block out the morning Sunday. If you're lucky, you're still mostly dressed. If you're not, well, at least you have plausible deniability and a good story for next week's confessional. The servants are already at work, tiptoeing through the debris with a look that says, "I get paid, but not enough for this." They collect empty goblets, sweep up oyster shells, and try not to stare at the slumbering nobility sprawled across the room like casualties from a particularly spirited joust. One poor page is tasked with peeling Lady Margaret off the chaise longue and helping her find her shoes, or at least 2 shoes that match. Every so often, a member of the clergy drifts by, offering a discreet blessing or a strong suggestion that you attend Mass. Repentance, after all, is the unofficial after-party. The conversation is awkward, filled with non-committal nods and careful silences. Nobody quite remembers what happened, and everyone's hoping that the one person who does remember is too polite or too hungover to mention it. The Duchess, who danced on the table now, pretends she has a sore ankle. The Lord who sang Greensleeves in his undergarments is making loud official pronouncements about the weather. Breakfast, if you can find it, is a mixture of stale bread, cold meat, and regret. Someone passes around a pitcher of water, but nobody's brave enough to drink it, settling instead for the hair of the dog, a little more wine to take the edge off the existential dread. The rumors are already beginning to bubble up. Someone is missing an earring. Someone else claims to have glimpsed a ghost in the corridor. It was just the bishop looking for the exit. If you're wise, you'll slip away quietly. Tuck yourself into a side corridor, grab your least filthy cloak, and avoid eye contact with the servants. You'll spend the day trying to piece together memories. Flashes of candlelight, a lute solo, a disastrous attempt at blind man's buff. You make a silent promise to never do this again, at least until the next invitation arrives, sealed with the king's wax. Because in the end, the aftermath is always the same. A little embarrassment, a lot of headaches, and the enduring medieval miracle of surviving another royal party. One more sunrise, one more secret, and one more story to pretend you don't remember. Some poor soul has to mop up the mess, literally. Servants swap stories, recover lost rings, and occasionally find a minor noble still asleep in the linen closet. They're paid in silence, tips, and the hope of not getting blamed. Let's take a moment to appreciate the real heroes of the medieval revel. The cleanup crew. When the last candle gutters out and the final guest stumbles off clutching a half-eaten honey cake, the servants sweep in, armed with brooms, mops, and the world's greatest poker faces. If you think your job is thankless, imagine being the one responsible for scraping oyster shells and mysterious stains out of 500-year-old tapestry, all before the lady of the house wakes up. The process is an art form. First, the servants carefully tiptoe around slumbering nobles. Nobody wants to be the one who accidentally wakes a hungover baroness with a mop to the face. It's a delicate dance, involving a lot of eye-rolling, whispered warnings, and the occasional gentle nudge with a feather duster. If you find a noble sprawled on the floor, etiquette requires that you return their dignity and their shoes before anyone else notices. The only exception, Sir Geoffrey, who's so notorious for these situations that Geoffreying is now a verb in the servants' break room. Lost and found is a thriving sub-economy. Throughout the morning, baskets fill with all manner of abandoned property. Jeweled pins, silk gloves, the odd codpiece, and last night's love letters, still damp with spilled mead. The servants keep careful records, knowing full well that tomorrow's drama often depends on who gets their ring or their compromising note back first. It's a game of discretion, strategy, and subtle reminders that a little tip can go a long way in the right hands. Of course, the real cleaning is less glamorous. There are sticky tables, shattered goblets, and mysterious puddles best left unexplored. The floors are swept, scrubbed, and, when in doubt, covered with fresh rushes to disguise whatever couldn't be removed. That slightly floral scent in the air? Not perfume, just rosemary and mint scattered over stains too stubborn for even the most determined scrubbing. And, every so often, a servant discovers an unclaimed cloak or finds a minor noble curled up like a dormouse in the linen closet, having fled there during blind man's buff and never returned. The conversation among the staff is sharp, quick, and wickedly observant. Servants are the true chroniclers of the court. They know who left with whom, who lost what, and who will be making hasty apologies over breakfast. The stories they swap, quietly, out of earshot, would make even the boldest bard blush. Yet, they're masters of discretion. For the right price, a servant can forget almost anything, and for the right story, they can remember every detail. And then there are the hazards of the job. Cleaning up after medieval nobility means dealing with half-eaten food, upended wine jugs, and the constant threat of being blamed for something you had nothing to do with. It wasn't me, my lord. The roast peacock was already on fire when I arrived. Tips are given in coins, leftover pastries, and sometimes just a promise that, this time, the kitchen won't run out of bread. No task is too small. No secret too big. The highest compliment a servant can receive? Being invisible. If the castle looks as pristine as it did yesterday, or at least smells less like disappointment and more like time, the crew has succeeded. Sometimes the best reward is simply making it to the end of the morning without being summoned to explain why there's a pair of silk stockings draped over the royal scepter. By mid-morning, the evidence of last night's revelry is packed away. The scandalous notes are redistributed, or in some cases, quietly destroyed, and the castle is restored to its illusion of decorum. The servants melt back into the shadows, the unsung heroes of medieval chaos, ready to do it all again next time, armed with sharper wits, stronger soap, and a brand new list of who lost what and with whom. Sometimes word gets out. The punishment? Public penance? A stern letter from Rome, or being exiled to manage a distant sheep farm. If you're royalty, you get a strongly worded sermon and a new nickname. Let's imagine it. The sun has barely crept over the castle battlements when the first whispers begin. By breakfast, the kitchen staff knows, and by noon, so does everyone from the head butler to the local blacksmith. Medieval secrets have the shelf life of unrefrigerated oysters. What happened at last night's revel? Whether it's a romantic misadventure, a brawl involving a roast boar, or a midnight serenade that ended in a fish pond, is on its way to becoming public property. And in a society where reputation is currency, scandal is the kind of wealth you don't want to accumulate. If you're a minor noble, consequences come quickly and creatively. Maybe you're summoned before the local priest for a highly awkward confession that doubles as community theatre. Perhaps you're required to make a public apology to Lady Agnes and her entire extended family, while standing barefoot on cold stone, clutching a wilted bouquet. At best, you might be assigned to penance duty, volunteering at the local leper house, or, more humiliatingly, tasked with cataloguing the castle's supply of dried turnips for the winter. Nothing says lesson learned like counting root vegetables with a hangover. Should your antics attract the attention of the church, things get formal fast. Enter the stern letter from Rome, filled with ornate curses and at least 3 paragraphs about the dignity of the cloth. Your local bishop might demand a donation to atone for your sins, or insist you light enough votive candles to set off the castle's primitive smoke alarm. Confession is recommended, repentance is expected, and forgetting is highly unlikely. Of course, the greatest punishment is reserved for those rare times when royal misbehavior crosses borders, when a diplomat's daughter is involved, or a foreign envoy is discovered in a compromising position with someone's brother-in-law. The result? Exile, usually to the least desirable corner of the kingdom. Medieval sheep farms are the quiet firing of the era. Isolated, smelly, and filled with the kind of philosophical reflection that comes from counting sheep and regrets. If you're lucky, you'll be invited back after a suitable period of reflection, assuming you haven't started talking to the livestock. But royalty plays by a different rulebook. Kings, queens, and their inner circle rarely face the full brunt of consequence. Instead, they get public penance of the performance art variety. Picture it. The king stands before his court, solemn and red-eyed, as the court chaplain recites a homily about restraint and virtue. Behind him, the queen glares just enough to get her point across. The punishment for royal indiscretions is usually less about justice and more about optics, restoring order, signaling that the rules still matter, and providing the court with a new nickname or two. The best part? Medieval society is built on memory, but it's also built on the cycle of scandal and forgiveness. A new nickname sticks, Lord Geoffrey the Rash, Lady Margaret the Lively, but within weeks, something even juicier will come along to steal the spotlight. If your scandal is especially creative, It may even inspire a bardic ballad, sung loudly and off-key at every feast for the next decade. The true horror isn't the punishment, it's the immortality of court gossip. Still, there's a strange comfort in it all. Even the highest lords and ladies are only ever one mistake away from becoming this season's cautionary tale. Reputation is fragile, forgiveness is performative, and redemption is always just a generous donation away. If you keep your head down, offer enough apologies, and make sure to blame your squire, you'll survive. You may even find yourself at the next party, albeit with a new nickname and a much warier look in your eye. Because in medieval high society, the only thing more powerful than a royal secret is a royal scandal. And the only thing more reliable than gossip is the fact that, sooner or later, it's someone else's turn. Royal orgies weren't just for pleasure, they were for politics. Marriages were made, alliances brokered, and the odd war declared over a misinterpreted wink. Nothing builds trust like mutual embarrassment. Let's pull back the velvet curtain on the real business of medieval revelry: power. In the Middle Ages, a party was never just a party. It was a battlefield, less about swords, more about sheets. Every guest list was a chessboard, with each noble hoping to nudge their piece a little closer to the throne. While the minstrels sang and the candles flickered, the real negotiations happened in corners, on cushions, and occasionally under tables. Marriage was the ultimate alliance tool, and no one knew it better than the nobles. Forget romance. Weddings were mergers, sometimes finalized while both parties wore nothing but optimism and someone else's jewelry. If you found yourself dancing with a duke's daughter, you might be halfway to a betrothal by the time the last verse ended. The next morning, parents would negotiate dowries and titles over cold stew, while pretending last night's indiscretions were all part of God's mysterious plan. These parties were also prime territory for spies and schemers. Rival factions circled each other, feigning friendship while watching for a careless confession or a revealing slip. The Duchess, who laughed a little too long at the king's joke, was possibly auditioning for a new alliance. The Baron who left early was definitely plotting something, or at least suffering from a suspicious oyster. Even a shared glance across a goblet could tip the balance of power. Medieval politics thrived on nuance and ambiguity, unlike the food, which was always disappointingly straightforward. Occasionally, alliances were cemented in the least dignified ways imaginable. A secret romance between two houses could avert a war or start one. There are entire villages that owe their founding to a midnight tryst between a lady-in-waiting and a particularly ambitious page. Children born 9 months after these parties were often given mysterious middle names, and everyone pretended not to notice the sudden resemblance to the court jester. Of course, politics at these gatherings didn't stop with matchmaking. Debts were forgiven, promises made, and, sometimes, grudges born. The king's favors, whether they took the form of land, a title, or a particularly enthusiastic nod during a dance, could shift the fortunes of entire families. The losers at love often became the winners at intrigue, biding their time until the next round of courtly musical chairs. And then there's the chaos of misunderstandings. A misinterpreted gesture, a joke made in the wrong ear, or the classic "I thought you were someone else," has led to everything from feuds to full-scale border skirmishes. History's most embarrassing wars sometimes began with a misdirected love note or an overzealous embrace during blind man's buff. Nothing unites people like shared embarrassment, and nothing divides them like the suspicion that someone else had more fun. Even the church got in on the action. Bishops forged alliances with powerful families, sometimes literally in the bedchamber. Blessings were given, and, on occasion, withdrawn, penance exchanged for promises, and the occasional relic discreetly swapped under the table. Spiritual leverage became just another bargaining chip in the endless game of thrones. Beneath all the intrigue, there was a strange kind of honesty. In these moments of revelry, where rank blurred and inhibitions evaporated, people were, briefly, just people. Lovers, rivals, friends, and enemies, united by the fact that tomorrow they'd all need to show up at Mass and pretend none of this ever happened. So as the candles gutter and alliances, romantic and otherwise, are quietly sealed, you realize that history isn't made in great halls and battlefields alone. Sometimes it's decided on velvet cushions, in whispered promises, and in laughter echoing across the stones. Because in the end, nothing builds trust like surviving a little mutual embarrassment, and nothing says political alliance like an awkward smile over breakfast. Last night's fashion faux pas is tomorrow's trend. Suddenly, everyone's wearing velvet slippers and pretending it's a French custom. The real winners are the tailors. Business booms after every scandal. Let's take a twirl through the aftermath of medieval fashion. The morning after a royal orgy, as the last servants sweep up feathers and the courtiers stagger back to their own beds, the world of high style quietly transforms. Every ripped hem, every lost button, every accidental sleeve swap becomes instant inspiration for next week's social climbers. In the Middle Ages, fashion is less about taste and more about plausible storytelling. What began as an embarrassing wardrobe malfunction in the heat of revelry can easily become the latest it look, so long as you tell the tale with enough confidence. Picture Lady Agnes, who, thanks to a spilled goblet of wine and one overzealous dance, ended the night with her chemise trailing like a bridal train. By noon, half the ladies at court have adjusted their hems, and suddenly everyone is complimenting the Agnes drape, a look that's both accidental and extremely drafty. If anyone asks, it's inspired by the latest Parisian fashion. Never mind that nobody at court has been to Paris. Fashion in the medieval world is always imported. Even if the only thing it actually imports is embarrassment. Then there are the men. A broken garter at midnight becomes a bold new way to wear hose. One leg up, one leg scandalously bare. All the rage until someone's uncle tries it and ruins the look for everyone. Velvet slippers, hastily donned after someone misplaced their boots, are suddenly all the rage in the ballroom, even though everyone knows they were really just an excuse to avoid stepping on cold stone floors. As for codpieces, well, let's just say every size and shape has a brief moment in the limelight, depending on which noble lost theirs in the wine punch. Tailors, meanwhile, are having a field day. Every scandal means new orders, urgent repairs, and a chance to suggest an improvement that's really just an attempt to future-proof outfits against next week's inevitable chaos. Need a doublet that comes off in one pull? There's a tailor for that. A cloak that resists wine stains? Absolutely. Discreet pouches for hiding love notes, emergency coins, or last night's misplaced jewelry? No problem. Tailors are the true power behind the throne, quietly adjusting hemlines and inventing stories to go with every visible stain. Sometimes, entire trends are born out of necessity. A noble who can't find her stockings claims she's embracing the bare-leg look inspired by ancient Roman statues. The bishop, caught with his surplice on backwards, claims it's a new form of penance. The king, always eager to lead by example, adopts a boldly patterned sash that started life as a table runner. Within a week, every aspiring courtier is clamoring for a sash of their own, preferably one without last night's stew still clinging to it. And then there are the accessories. Feathers in hair, ribbons at wrists, a necklace of fruit for the daring or just forgetful. The more absurd the backstory, the more likely it is to catch on. By the end of the season, nobody quite remembers what the original fashion was, only that it's now considered gauche to leave your hat on at dinner. Unless, of course, you lost your hairpiece during last night's round of hot tapestry. For those who can't keep up, the only solution is to claim they're ahead of the trend. Arrived in mismatched shoes? It's a statement. Wearing last week's colors? It's nostalgia. Still in last night's wrinkled tunic? It's avant-garde comfort, darling. Very Italian. In the end, medieval fashion isn't about looking good. It's about looking like you meant to do whatever just happened. If you can sell the story, you can set the trend. And if you can't, just find a clever tailor and a faster rumor. Because in a world where scandal moves faster than fashion, the only thing you really need to wear is confidence and maybe a backup pair of slippers. By mid-morning, the rumors are already spreading. Did the Duchess really do that with the bishop's hat? Who fainted first? The medieval equivalent of a group chat is just 4 gossips and a guy named Roger. Let's step into the world of medieval rumor, where news travels faster than a courtier who's just realized he left his pants in the Great Hall, while the nobility nurse their hangovers and the servants scrub out the last traces of honeyed wine. The castle corridors are abuzz with whispers, snickers, and wild exaggerations. Gossip isn't just a pastime. It's the unofficial court sport. And everyone is playing, whether they know it or not. Forget newspapers, pamphlets, or Twitter threads. The main engine of the medieval news cycle is the human mouth, usually attached to a chambermaid with excellent hearing and no qualms about embellishment. Information is currency, and the value goes up with every telling. By the time the sun hits the West Tower, the story of Sir Geoffrey's tumble into the punch bowl has turned into an epic saga involving 3 goats, a lute, and at least one mistaken identity. The cast of characters is always the same. There's the head cook, who claims to know everything because the staff hear more with their ears than the lords do with their eyes. There's Lady Eleanor's lady-in-waiting, who can't resist dropping cryptic hints and then refusing to explain them. There's that one stable boy who's always in the wrong place at the right time, somehow managing to collect more secrets than horse manure. And, of course, there's Roger. No one is quite sure what Roger's actual job is. But if you want to know who kissed whom, whose tunic was torn, or what really happened behind the arras, Roger's your man. Just don't expect him to reveal his sources, unless you bribe him with a slice of yesterday's pie. The game is all about plausible deniability. I didn't say it. I heard it from Agnes. Don't look at me. Ask the scullery maid. It's probably just a rumor. But within hours, last night's shenanigans have turned into legend, and legend into prophecy. The Duchess's supposed exploits become more elaborate with every retelling, until she's either the hero or the villain of every story told in the kitchens, the laundry, and the line for confession. Every so often, the gossip mill spits out something so outrageous that even the most hardened listeners snort into their ale. Did the bishop really dance on the table? Yes, but only because he was dodging a falling candlestick. Was there a secret marriage between the minstrel and the foreign envoy? No, but there was a very confusing game of charades. Who was seen sneaking out with a tray of oysters and a mysterious smile? Theories abound. Roger claims to have seen everything, but he's not talking yet. For the truly ambitious, gossip isn't just entertainment, it's leverage. A well-timed word to the right person can shift alliances, settle old scores, or score an extra portion of dessert. Servants become kingmakers, and the best storytellers rise to the top of the social food chain, wielding secrets like daggers. Some rumors die quickly, forgotten by lunchtime. Others linger, growing in the retelling until they're immortalized in verse by the local bard, or worse, painted as a marginalia doodle by a mischievous monk. For those on the receiving end, the only hope is to brazen it out. Laugh louder than the gossips, Own your embarrassing moment, or, best of all, start an even juicier rumor about someone else. In a medieval court, your reputation is only as good as your last scandal, and tomorrow's story is always waiting in the wings. So, as you drift off to sleep, spare a thought for the medieval gossips, spinning last night's chaos into tomorrow's legends. And remember, in a world without privacy settings, the only safe secret is the one you haven't told Roger. Medieval orgies were a medical adventure, questionable hygiene, dubious potions, and diseases that hadn't even been named yet. You thought mourning after anxiety was bad. Try 14th century sweating sickness. Let's pause for a reality check. The flickering candlelight and velvet cushions might look romantic at 2 a.m., but by morning, you're confronted with the real hazards of medieval pleasure. Unlike the modern world, with its multivitamins, antibacterial soap, and do not eat warning labels, medieval Europe's public health campaign was mostly wishful thinking and a quick prayer to Saint Roch. First, there's the issue of basic cleanliness, or the lack thereof. Showers and bathtubs are centuries away, and a proper bath is considered suspect, dangerous, or at best, a rare luxury for saints and royalty. Most guests are working with little more than a rinse in a chilly stream and a spritz of rose water to cover the more persistent aromas. You're lucky if your seatmate at the revel smells like hay and not like last month's cheese shipment. Clothes, meanwhile, are recycled more often than apologies. That lavish velvet cloak? Worn 6 nights in a row and never washed, because washing ruins the fabric and natural oils are good for the skin. Lice are not just possible, they're practically a +1. You and everyone you meet are living petri dishes, hosting a thriving ecosystem of fleas, mites, and all the best medieval bugs. Everyone scratches. Everyone pretends not to notice. Then there are the so-called remedies and aphrodisiacs. You might be offered a love potion brewed from local herbs and a recipe that's 3/4 wishful thinking and 1/4 mild poison. These medieval cocktails promise everything from improved stamina to eternal devotion, but the real result is more likely to be an upset stomach and a deeply confusing rash. If you make it through the night without a new itch, consider yourself blessed by the saints. The real danger, though, is invisible. In a world before antibiotics and germ theory, disease is everywhere. The wine might be strong, but it can't kill everything lurking in the oyster platter or the hands that passed you the bread. Sweating sickness, a mysterious and terrifying medieval flu, is just the beginning. You've got fevers, coughs, chills, boils, and rashes, each more mysterious and ominous than the last. And the worst part? Nobody has a clue what causes any of it. Theories range from bad air to sinful thoughts, and the local healer's solution is often to bleed you with a dull knife or apply a paste made from pigeon droppings. Dentistry is also a medieval adventure. If you chip a tooth biting into a candied hazelnut, the best you can hope for is a quick extraction by the barber surgeon. That's the same man who cuts hair, pulls teeth, and occasionally applies leeches, all with the same pair of scissors. Mouthwash is just strong wine, and brushing your teeth means rubbing them with a twig, if you bother at all. Still, the social pressure is real. Nobody wants to be the guest who infects the entire court. If you sneeze, 3 people will cross themselves and someone will suggest a pilgrimage. If you cough, the room grows quiet, and the bishop starts blessing the wine. By the end of the night, you've survived more than just your dignity. You've run a medical gauntlet, and the odds are only slightly better than at an actual tournament. So as you pick your way through the aftermath, dodging dubious stains and eyeing the cure-all tonic with suspicion, remember, history wasn't just made by the bold and the beautiful, but also by those lucky enough to avoid anything ending in pox. In the medieval world, the most coveted prize isn't a lover's embrace. It's waking up the next day with nothing more than a headache and a story. Some monarchs took let's get wild to whole new levels. From Charles VI of France's infamous Burning Men party to Henry VIII's pre-marital shenanigans, the records are as hilarious as they are horrifying. Let's be honest. If anyone was going to take a medieval orgy from questionable to what on earth just happened, it was always the person wearing the biggest crown. Royalty had the resources, the free time, and absolutely no one willing to say, "Maybe that's not a great idea, Your Grace." It's a combination that has produced some of the wildest footnotes in the history books. Take Charles VI of France, also known, without irony, as Charles the Mad. In 1393, he decided a masquerade ball just wasn't spicy enough. Instead, he ordered the infamous Bal des Ardents, or Bal of the Burning Men. The king and several courtiers dressed up as wild men, outfits made of linen soaked in resin and pitch, which is pretty much medieval for highly flammable yoga pants. Because nothing says good party like costumes that double as emergency torches. Predictably, disaster struck. A guest carrying a torch got too close, and in seconds, the dancers went up like a thatched roof in August. People dove for the wine barrels, the medieval version of a fire extinguisher, and the royal chronicler ran out of parchment trying to record all the casualties and excuses. Charles survived. But no open flames at court events became the least enforced rule in France. But Charles was hardly alone. Medieval monarchs across Europe embraced chaos as both a pastime and a PR strategy. Take Henry VIII of England, long before he was famous for inventing divorce as a competitive sport. Young Henry was a connoisseur of extravagant parties, masks, tournaments, and if gossip is to be believed, more than a few private suppers where the guest list was as secret as the menu. He was known to dress in disguise, crash his own banquets, and spark impromptu dance-offs. He once staged a party where he and his friends dressed as Robin Hood and his merry men, then burst into the Queen's chamber to surprise the ladies in waiting. Imagine HR's face if your CEO tried that at the office holiday party. Of course, royal wildness wasn't just for men. Catherine the Great of Russia, whose private life is still the stuff of both legend and slander, allegedly hosted intellectual salons that doubled as flirtation festivals for the sharpest minds, and occasionally sharpest jawlines, of the empire. The result: passionate debates about philosophy, policy, and, if rumors are true, who could unlace a corset the fastest. While many of the stories about her are exaggerated, one thing is certain: Catherine's court was never boring. The key theme? Nobody could stop the king, or queen, once the party started. Courtiers went along, even when the stakes were high and the clothing highly flammable. If you said no, you might find yourself reassigned to counting sheep in the outer provinces. If you said yes, congratulations, you just became a character in a ballad that would be sung, badly, for generations. The aftermath of these royal excesses was always the same. A lot of wide-eyed witnesses, an official statement downplaying the incident, and an urgent request for more fireproof drapes or sturdier banquet tables. The common people, meanwhile, got fresh stories to trade at the market, and the church usually picked up a few extra confessions in the days after. So next time you think your office party got out of hand, remember, history is full of kings who went much, much further. Some set new fashion trends, others set the curtains on fire, but all of them proved that, in the Middle Ages, the wildest parties didn't just make history, they occasionally burned it down. Every royal orgy had a power couple, or at least a power triangle. Some affairs toppled kingdoms, others just ruined dinner. Behind every great scandal is a very patient scribe. Let's draw back the velvet curtains and peek at some of the medieval world's most notorious liaisons, where romance and intrigue collided on feather beds and, occasionally, overturned banquet tables. In the Middle Ages, Love was rarely just about love. It was a dangerous cocktail of politics, ambition, and, if you were unlucky, extremely poor timing. You never knew if that whispered promise behind the arras would turn into a lifelong alliance, a brief tryst, or a civil war with a body count. Take Eleanor of Aquitaine, Queen of both France and England, who single-handedly rewrote the rules of courtly romance. Her marriage to King Louis VII of France soured faster than a pitcher of summer milk, but she rebounded by marrying Henry II of England. Their union sparked decades of drama, including a literal war between their children and enough romantic side plots to fill a Netflix series. Eleanor was rumored to host courts of love, where noble ladies judged the poetic efforts and, let's be honest, the physique of the kingdom's most eligible bachelors. Affairs here were as strategic as they were steamy, and it's a safe bet the scribes ran out of ink long before they ran out of gossip. Or consider the legendary love triangle of King Arthur, Queen Guinevere, and Sir Lancelot, a tale so famous it survived countless medieval parties, suspiciously poetic chroniclers, and even Monty Python. Was it true? Maybe. Maybe not. But the point is this: every king feared a trusted knight and a bored queen. Even the rumor of an affair could destabilize a kingdom faster than a tax increase. Then there's Edward II of England, whose favorite, Piers Gaveston, set the court on fire with his extravagant taste, biting wit, and possibly just a touch too much eyeliner. The king's infatuation scandalized the nobles, who responded by banishing Gaveston, inviting him back, and then, medieval politics being what it is, murdering him for good measure. The lesson? In royal courts, it was never just about who loved whom, but who controlled the narrative. And let's not forget Catherine the Great, whose love life became legendary, largely thanks to her enemies. She surrounded herself with favorites, each carefully chosen for loyalty, charm, and a decent conversational game. While most of the outrageous rumors were just slander with extra horse references, there's no question Catherine used her relationships to shape policy and shore up power. After all, it's much easier to change the course of history when your lover is also your top military advisor. But not all flings changed kingdoms. Sometimes they just ruined a feast. Take Charles II of England, whose orgies were less about politics and more about never eating dinner alone. His long-suffering queen, Catherine of Braganza, had to contend with a never-ending parade of mistresses, all immortalized in paintings, poetry, and the occasional pie fight. The only constant? The court scribes, quietly updating genealogies and praying nobody ever asked about paternity tests. Behind every great scandal, there really is a very patient scribe, someone with enough ink to chronicle both the triumphs and the cringe-worthy moments. Their job, to record, exaggerate, and occasionally redact just enough to keep their own head attached to their shoulders. So next time you think your love life is complicated, remember, medieval royals risked everything for love, or at least for a memorable weekend. Their flings changed dynasties, inspired poets, and, at the very least, provided endless material for dinner-table gossip and the world's most awkward family reunions. In the end, some romances toppled kingdoms. Others just gave the scribes something new to write about, leaving the castle at dawn in yesterday's clothes, avoiding eye contact with the baker, and pretending the mud on your boots is just fashion. Medieval society invented the walk of shame. And yes, everyone was watching. Let's stroll out of the castle quietly if you can manage it. The torches gutter low as you tiptoe through the hallways, ducking behind pillars and praying no one sees you clutching your shoes in one hand and your dignity in the other. The chill of morning is sharper than your regrets. Every footstep echoes, a slow drumbeat of embarrassment punctuating the aftermath of last night's revelry. There's a reason the medieval walk of shame is legendary. The castle's night watch is still on duty, and they don't miss a thing. The page boy sweeping up rose petals gives you a knowing smirk. The kitchen maid drops a curtsy, then whispers something to her friend that will be repeated verbatim in the market square by noon. Even the resident mouser gives you a suspicious look. You pass a group of servants rolling out barrels of ale, and one of them winks. Long night, my lord. You resist the urge to explain that the stain on your tunic is wine, not a bad decision. The distinction in medieval society is rarely believed, but the journey isn't over yet. You have to make it through the castle gates. It's barely dawn, but there's already a small crowd outside. Early rising merchants, the odd baker, and a group of gossips who appear to have set up camp just for moments like this. They watch with a mixture of envy and judgment, taking mental notes for tonight's stories. Someone offers you a stale roll, and you realize it's not a gift. It's a prop for their tale. Remember, he left with a bread roll and a limp for the upper crust. The walk of shame is both a hazard and a sport. Nobles try to outdo each other in mourning. After nonchalance, Lady Margaret swans through the courtyard in a cloak 3 sizes too big, chin held high, and when a squire gawks at her mismatched slippers, she just claims it's Italian fashion. Lord Geoffrey claims he slept in the stables for the ambience, conveniently forgetting to mention the cow he used for a pillow. The trick is to appear unbothered, like you meant to wear last night's doublet and don't mind the odd turnip leaf stuck to your hair. Of course, the real winners are the servants. They're stationed at every staircase, alcove, and exit, their expressions perfectly schooled into polite indifference. Inside, they're mentally awarding points for style, creativity, and how quickly you can flee before the bells for morning mass start to ring. If you manage to slip out unnoticed, you earn the coveted ghost status for the day, though someone, somewhere, probably saw you and is already sketching the scene for the castle's next tapestry. Even in town, you're not safe. The miller's wife peers out from her window, and the local priest greets you a little too loudly in front of a group of nuns. You do your best to act casual, nodding as if nothing is amiss, while the local children try to guess what color your stockings are under the mud, and heaven help you if you have to walk past your own family. The look from your mother says, "We'll talk later." The look from your younger sibling says, "Teach us your ways." And yet, there's a certain camaraderie to the medieval walk of shame. Everyone's done it. Peasants, knights, bishops, and the occasional royal in deep disguise. It's the great social leveler. By midday, the town has moved on to a new scandal, and by next week, you'll be laughing about it with friends, or pretending it never happened, depending on who's listening. So you keep your chin up, march through the market, and tell yourself, mud is just rustic eyeliner, and last night's tunic is this morning's statement piece. In a world with no privacy settings, surviving the walk of shame is practically a badge of honor, and a guarantee you'll be invited back next time. Before breakfast, everyone attends a quick prayer service. Is it for forgiveness? Maybe. Is it to make sure nobody tells the Pope? Definitely. You nod along, clutching a hangover and a slightly used bedsheet. Let's set the mood. The room is heavy with incense and regret. Sunlight creeps through stained glass, coloring the assembly in pious purples and guilty golds. You shuffle in, moving more by instinct than choice, elbow to elbow with a collection of lords, ladies, and assorted nobility who just hours earlier were making questionable life choices on the same stone floor now polished for prayer. A few brave souls try to look earnest, the rest just try to keep their eyes open. The bishop is already there, eyes half-lidded, hands folded, determined to look as if he didn't personally bless the wine last night. You take your seat, or, more accurately, collapse into it. There's a hush, punctuated only by the soft clink of rosary beads and the faint crinkle of a hidden hip flask. Someone coughs. Someone else mutters what sounds suspiciously like the lyrics to a drinking song, disguised as Latin. Even the altar candles flicker in silent solidarity, struggling to stay upright. The ritual begins. There's holy water, liberally sprinkled, sometimes suspiciously aimed at a select few. The prayers are short, mostly because the clergy know better than to test the collective patience, or collective stomach, of a room full of hungover aristocrats. You try to keep your thoughts focused on atonement, but your mind drifts to the mysterious bruise on your shin, the cryptic note you found tucked into your stocking, and the sneaking suspicion that you still have honeycomb in your hair. The readings are carefully chosen, reminders about humility, forgiveness, and not passing judgment, which is ironic considering the glares some guests are shooting at their former dance partners. The Duchess with a reputation closes her eyes and whispers along, as if she's making up for lost time. Lord Geoffrey the Rash, newly nicknamed, has strategically positioned himself behind a pillar, only emerging when the bishop intones the collective plea for mercy and discretion. There's always a moment of uneasy silence when the congregation is invited to offer personal prayers. Some actually pray, others bargain. If I survive this hangover, I swear I'll never eat oysters again. Let my spouse never ask about last night. Please, please don't let my mother-in-law hear a word of this. The petitions rise like steam from the stone floor, carried away on a current of hope, guilt, and lingering perfume. The best part of the ritual, of course, is the mutual understanding. Nobody here is judging because everyone has something to repent. The clergy offer absolution with a practiced hand, sometimes literally, as they lay on hands, and, in rare cases, a discreet headache remedy. There's a splash more holy water, a few half-hearted amens, and a rapid dismissal that feels less like spiritual liberation and more like the closing bell at a particularly rowdy tavern. Breakfast waits just outside. Bread, cheese, more wine, because hair of the dog is practically doctrine, and a handful of servants quietly handing out notes, lost jewelry, and, if you're unlucky, a gentle reminder that your tunic is inside out. By the time you shuffle back into the corridor, you feel a little lighter. Maybe it's the power of prayer. Maybe it's relief that nobody mentioned the flaming tapestry. Maybe it's just that, in the great game of medieval repentance, everyone gets a fresh start after sunrise, at least until the next royal invitation arrives. So you wipe your brow, straighten your wrinkled clothes, and remind yourself that forgiveness is a renewable resource. Holy water can't fix everything, but at least it gives you something to blame for your damp sleeves. In the medieval morning after, a prayer is as good as a secret handshake. You're all in this together, and no one is telling the Pope, at least, not today. You survived the night. Congratulations. But the consequences ripple through history. Marriages shift, alliances break, and somewhere, a medieval poet is already writing a slightly inaccurate epic about the night you tried to play the lute with your feet. Let's zoom out for a moment. The chandeliers are cool, the tapestries are rehung, and the castle resumes its illusion of order. But the effects of one night's revelry echo far beyond the snoring nobles and the last upturned goblet. These were the after-parties that reshaped nations, turned scandals into traditions, and built legends from hungover regrets. Every royal orgy was more than just an event. It was a crossroads where fate, politics, and happenstance met after dark. The alliances forged on velvet cushions and in shadowy alcoves could, and did, alter the balance of power for decades. A casual tryst here, a whispered promise there, and suddenly there's a new political marriage, a broken treaty, or a surprise inheritance that sets the whole feudal chessboard wobbling. Some of history's greatest feuds began not on the battlefield, but in an awkward embrace behind a potted plant. And it wasn't just the great decisions. The very fabric of medieval culture was woven with the threads of these wild nights. The fashion faux pas that sparked a trend, the rumor that became an epic poem, embellished, of course, for the entertainment of bored barons everywhere. The rivalry that started as a misunderstanding during Blind Man's Buff and ended as a three-generation blood feud commemorated in the marginalia of a very judgmental monk. These events didn't just influence the upper crust either. News of the latest scandal always trickled down, first to the servants, then to the village, and eventually all the way to the next kingdom over. A particularly juicy story might end up inspiring a folk song, or even influencing the way peasants named their pigs, Sir Geoffrey the Rash, anyone. In an age before newspapers or social media, these tales became the medieval version of trending hashtags, passed along, mutated, and immortalized in kitchen gossip and chapel confessionals alike. It's easy to dismiss these parties as pure indulgence, history's longest-running excuse for bad decisions and velvet laundry disasters. But they were also a pressure valve. In a world hemmed in by war, plague, and the ever-present threat of rain leaking through the roof, the medieval orgy was a rare moment when everyone, from the king to the stable boy, could laugh, scheme, and maybe, just maybe, forget about tomorrow. In those candlelit hours, the normal rules could be bent or broken, and everyone was free to imagine a life slightly less burdened by expectation. Of course, some consequences took longer to appear. 9 months later, there might be a mysterious increase in royal christenings. A century on, an entire family's claim to power could hinge on what really happened when the candles went out. Centuries later, you, the modern listener, are still hearing echoes of these nights in stories, jokes, and the occasional "did you know" at dinner parties. And while the details blur with every retelling, one truth stands firm. The Middle Ages weren't just built on battles and treaties, but on laughter, foolishness, and the unforgettable mess of being gloriously, ridiculously human. The people at these parties may be long gone, but their antics live on in every scandalous family story, every new fashion trend, and every time someone tries to play the lute with their feet. It never ends well, but someone always tries. So as you tuck yourself in, safe from the drafts and drama of yesteryear, remember, you too are part of the legacy. History is never just the big stuff. It's every embarrassing moment, every whispered rumor, and every night survived. One candle, one scandal, one improbable lute solo at a time. Not everything at a royal orgy was open invitation. Some connections needed code. You quickly realize there's a whole hidden language. A dropped handkerchief means, "meet me behind the tapestry." A strategically placed apple signals, "absolutely not." And if someone offers you a pomegranate, congratulations. You're now married in at least 2 minor principalities. Forget Tinder. This is medieval courtship, and it involves way more fruit. Let's slow down and translate the court's secret code. You might think flirting is universal, but medieval romance had its own elaborate dialect. In a room packed with rivals, servants, spies, and the occasional overzealous poet, subtlety was survival. There's no swipe right, there's just a lot of embroidery, winks, and the occasional celery stick left meaningfully on a platter. It starts before you even cross the threshold. A glance held a little too long across the banqueting table. That's an invitation, unless it's just someone trying to remember where they left their goblet. A handkerchief dropped with a flutter of the wrist is the medieval equivalent of sending a private message. For those in the know, the meaning is clear. Let's rendezvous near the privy, or meet me behind the tapestry where the light is forgiving and nobody's listening but the mice. The fruit, though, is where things get truly creative. Oranges, impossibly expensive and rare, signal wealth and confidence. Offering one is a power move, the medieval version of buying someone a drink in the VIP section. Apples, always in abundance, are a little trickier. Placing an apple on a plate means I'm spoken for, while taking a bite and offering it back says I'm open to negotiation. If you see someone tossing grapes into the air and catching them, it means they're either a master seducer or just very bored. The line, as always, is blurry. Pomegranates are the wild card. Rich with seeds and symbolism, they're the unofficial badge of I'm serious. Accept a pomegranate from the wrong noble, and you might find yourself explaining to a notary why you're suddenly engaged. Or worse, on the guest list for next week's even wilder party. There are stories of entire border disputes starting because two neighboring barons offered the same lady a pomegranate on the same night. The real power brokers learn to feign allergies or claim spiritual fasting when things get out of hand. Hand fans are another code. A fan snapped shut with a flourish says, "Not tonight." Tapping the handle twice against your palm is the equivalent of, "Let's discuss terms." Fanning oneself rapidly means either you're quite dashing or, "This room is dangerously flammable." Context is everything. Even ribbons tied in certain knots can carry hidden messages. A simple bow means, "Intrigued? Inquire later." A knot tied twice? That's, "Nice try, but my uncle is watching." Of course, there's room for improvisation and disaster. A misplaced kerchief could spark a misunderstanding that lasts generations. Once, a lord famously dropped his gloves at the feet of the Duchess, only to find himself propositioned by her mother. Another time, a tray of figs, arranged just so, was meant to signal a private invitation, but ended up starting a food fight. Welcome to medieval romance. High stakes, low predictability, and an astonishing amount of produce. Meanwhile, the servants, fluent in all these codes, act as unwitting go-betweens. They deliver ribbons, relay folded notes, and occasionally whisper advice about which fruit is safest to accept if you don't want to end up married, exiled, or both. The truly savvy noble always tips the servants well. They're the medieval equivalent of a matchmaking app, and they remember everything. So, as you navigate the room, dodging apple cores and sidestepping cryptic handkerchiefs, remember, in the Middle Ages, love was as much about subtlety as scandal. There's no direct messaging, only meaningful glances and a dangerous amount of symbolism. Play your cards and your fruit right, and you might just find yourself at the center of the next great romance, or, at the very least, not the subject of tomorrow's cautionary tale. There's always that one person who wasn't invited but shows up anyway. Sometimes it's a court jester with too many jokes about bishops. Sometimes a wandering minstrel who accidentally becomes part of the entertainment, and occasionally a lost falconer who just wanted directions to the kitchens. The rule is simple. If you can juggle, play an instrument, or convincingly feign amnesia, you're allowed to stay. Let's pan the candlelit room and spot the gatecrashers. While the royal guest list is as tightly controlled as a king's purse strings, no orgy in history has ever managed perfect exclusivity. The truly determined will always find a way in, especially if they arrive carrying a lute, a pie, or just enough self-confidence to blend in with the velvet crowd. This is the original crashing the VIP lounge, but with more tights and fewer bouncers. First among the uninvited is the court jester, a master of camouflage and comic timing. Nobody remembers inviting him, but by the time you notice his presence, he's already regaling the crowd with bawdy tales, questionable magic tricks, and at least 3 impressions of the king that everyone pretends not to find funny. The jester's gift? He's untouchable. He can mock the bishop's dancing, pinch the duchess's hat, and get away with it all by hiding behind the sacred shield of, "It's just a joke, Your Grace." If things get tense, he'll distract the room with a quick juggling act, usually using whatever fruit isn't already encoded with romantic signals. Then there are the wandering minstrels. Maybe they were hired, maybe they just followed the sound of laughter, or maybe they lost a bet in the next village over. Either way, they materialize at every party, instrument in hand, ready to improvise a song about last night's stew or Lady Margaret's latest escapade. Sometimes they're pressed into service, serenading tipsy nobles or narrating games of blind man's buff in heroic verse. Other times, they're content to blend in, sipping wine and gathering scandal for their next ballad. The smartest ones never use real names in their songs, at least not until they've left the region. And then there's always the random lost soul. A falconer who took a wrong turn, a merchant hoping to network, or a squire who mistook the laundry room for a shortcut and stumbled onto the main event. You can spot them by their look of genuine confusion, a telltale sign they didn't receive the official what-to-wear memo. But if they can tell a story, pour a drink, or offer a plausible alibi for the empty seat at dinner, they're quickly welcomed. After all, every orgy needs a wild card, if only to give the gossip something new to talk about. The rules for outsiders are simple: amuse or be amusing, blend in or be gone. If you can invent a convincing backstory, yes, I'm Lord Neville's cousin, thrice removed, visiting from the north, you're in. If you're especially entertaining, you might even become the night's unofficial guest of honor, toasted by the king and included in the tapestry, albeit in the background, next to the dogs. Of course, not every outsider means trouble. Sometimes their presence diffuses tension, turning rivalries into raucous laughter. The jester's quick wit, the minstrel's music, or the falconer's wild story about a goose in the pantry can save a party from disaster, or at least provide an excuse for whatever goes wrong next. Even the servants play along, passing drinks and rumors with a wink, happy to have a new target for the castle's ever-hungry gossip mill. By sunrise, the true guests and the lucky outsiders are indistinguishable, at least until the next guest list is drawn up. As you look around, you realize the magic of these gatherings. No matter how exclusive, the real fun begins when the walls come down and the unexpected takes center stage. In a medieval orgy, being an outsider is less about where you're from and more about whether you can survive, improvise, and tell a good story, preferably with a lute, a joke, or a tray of slightly stolen pastries. You thought medieval fashion was just for show? Think again. Mid-festivities, you're treated to a spectacle as a noble's hose gives way or a corset explodes under pressure. There are more wardrobe malfunctions here than in a modern reality show reunion. Bonus points to whoever manages to keep their dignity after being pantsed by a baroness with a wicked sense of humor. Let's face it, in the Middle Ages, getting dressed was practically an Olympic event. Getting undressed, especially in a hurry, under the influence, or with a crowd cheering you on, was a recipe for disaster. For all the drama and decadence of a royal orgy, nothing brings the highborn down to earth faster than a good old-fashioned fashion fail. It begins innocently enough. The room is buzzing with laughter. The wine flows like water, and everyone is feeling a little too brave in their best borrowed finery. Then, with a triumphant shout, a knight leaps onto a table, only for his hose to split with a sound so loud it stops the lute player mid-chorus. Gasps, snickers, and at least one fainting fit follow. The poor knight attempts a dignified exit. But dignity is hard to maintain when you're holding your trousers together with a borrowed napkin and the Duchess of Burgundy is leading the applause. Corsets are no safer. Worn tight enough to serve as both shapewear and emotional armor, they sometimes give out at the worst possible moment. One enthusiastic bow or a particularly energetic dance, and suddenly a noble woman's bodice erupts like a pastry under pressure. The servants, ever discreet, spring into action with spare shawls, safety pins, the medieval kind, that is to say, more ribbon, and an unspoken agreement to never mention it again, except in the kitchens, where it becomes the story of the season. Buttons and laces are the main culprits. Medieval tailors loved a challenge, and the more elaborate the garment, the more opportunities for chaos. Some doublets require a map and a minor engineering degree just to unfasten. Sleeves detach unexpectedly. Laces, after a night of tugging and toasting, decide to tie themselves into knots that would mystify a sailor. There are always at least 3 people trapped halfway out of their outfits at any given time, pleading for help or just accepting their new, slightly drafty reality. Then there are the accidental exposures. A courtier bends to retrieve a handkerchief, only for his breeches to betray him. A baroness attempts a flirtatious twirl and instead unveils more than just her petticoat. For every embarrassed noble, there's a jester or squire ready with a witty remark. "Nice garters, my lord. New from Paris?" The laughter is boisterous, but rarely cruel. After all, nobody is immune. And tomorrow, it might be you left blushing behind the candelabra. The truly unlucky become legends. Their names live on in rhyme, rumour, and, if they're really special, embroidered into the next great tapestry. Behold the night of Lady Alice's accidental mooning, as witnessed by half the court and 3 slightly traumatized friars. Tailors take notes, inventing ever more elaborate solutions, hidden clasps, back-up laces, and undergarments reinforced with hopes and prayers. Yet somehow, embarrassment transforms into camaraderie. Nobles help each other retie sashes, share cloaks, and laugh away the shame. The best recovery is to lean in, raise a goblet, and toast to the unpredictability of medieval couture. The unspoken motto, "If you can't fix it, own it." By sunrise, most malfunctions are just funny stories, icebreakers for next time, and ammunition for the gossips. So if you ever find yourself at a medieval party, remember, fashion is fleeting, dignity is negotiable, and the ability to laugh at your own misfortune is the most timeless accessory of all. Just check your laces, watch your hose, and never ever bet against a baroness with a twinkle in her eye and quick hands. So as the candles burn low and the echoes of medieval laughter fade into the ancient stone walls, take a deep breath. You've just survived a night at the wildest royal orgy the Middle Ages could dream up, dodging rogue bishops, sticky goblets, and the very real danger of being immortalized in a scandalous tapestry. You witnessed alliances made, hearts broken, tights ripped, and at least one noble quietly weeping into their pudding. Somehow, against the odds, you made it through with your dignity mostly intact and only a mild case of plague anxiety. It's easy to laugh at the chaos, the over-the-top fashion, the secret signals with fruit, the walk of shame past a highly judgmental goat. But underneath the absurdity was something stubbornly human. These medieval revelers, in all their ridiculousness, were just looking for connection, pleasure, maybe a bit of power, and probably a better mattress. History isn't just kings and battles, it's nights like these, messy and loud, where real lives were lived and occasionally regretted. So tonight, as you settle into your own bed, Fresh sheets, soft pillow, not a single baroness demanding interpretive lute music. Maybe whisper a quiet thank you to the past. Thank you to the servants who swept up after history's weirdest parties, to the poets who turned embarrassment into epic poetry, and even to the royal gossips who made sure no scandal went unrecorded. And thank you, above all, for the miracle of modern plumbing, and the fact that your greatest nighttime worry is probably just finding your phone charger. Because history is wild, gross, and often deeply silly, but it's also a testament to the creativity, resilience, and sheer stubborn hope of the human race. We've come a long way, from candlelit chaos to streaming bedtime stories, and if you can survive the medieval orgy, trust me, you can survive tomorrow too. Sleep well, friends. The past is finally quiet, and so are you. Good night.